is everybody in here, did you all have to battle in the trenches with GDPR? I mean, pretty much. Can I see a show of hands? Some, half and half. So you kind of understand a little bit. We're just a year out, what was it, May 25th? We hit the 1 year mark. So those big fines are coming. They're just around the corner. They're any moment now. So yeah, and so there's a lot you'll see. I mean, one of the things of our presentation is how much overlap there is. I mean, there's clearly a lot in the CCPA, even though the terminology is different, that was borrowed from the GDPR for sure. And I don't think I have to spend a lot of time telling you how important California is, right? It applies to any business anywhere located that does business with California residents. And so even though, as we all know, we don't have a single global US privacy law, this is essentially will be a de facto US law because of the size of the California economy and the importance of the California economy. It was passed in a hurry last year. You may have heard something about that. That's one of the reasons that there are so many areas of the law that are unclear, that have already needed to be corrected. There have been a few amendments to correct some obvious bloopers. There's some that remain, and we're kind of concerned about them. We'll talk a little bit, hopefully we'll have time to talk a little bit about the amendment process. But in any event, there was going to be a ballot initiative last fall. Some billionaire decided that privacy was important, and by God, we were going to have a ballot initiative. And so the politicians out there freaked out a little bit and said, we're going to preempt that with some legislation. And that was the CCPA. So unlike the GDPR, where you had pretty much, I think, at least a 4-year process, even longer, and you had the experience of the 1995 Privacy Directive behind it, there was really nothing deliberate about this process. It was really sort of thrown together. And so there are areas, as I said, where we're going to need some clarity. Unfortunately, we probably have to wait for some of it just for it to go into effect. January 1st is the date that it goes into effect. It's not actually enforceable until sometime after that. We're not entirely sure. I believe it's 6 months. It will be no later than July 1st of next year. Depending on how quickly the AG is writing the regs that will implement it, it will probably be sooner than that. He's probably writing them now. I don't know. But the regs will clarify certain aspects of it, but it's really hard to tell. There are a lot of gray areas in the law and a lot of operational challenges, as Sonali alluded to. So let's talk about to whom it applies as a covered entity, sort of as, think about those of you who were involved with the GDPR compliance process, know a little bit about GDPR. We have the notion of a data controller. Well, we have data subject, right? And under CCPA, that would really be consumer is the defined term, a California resident. You've got the data controller, which is really the covered entity under CCPA, the direct coverage of the act. And then you have a processor, you have sub-processors under the GDPR. That's a service provider. So, I mean, it's the same general idea. So for direct application, and notice these are ORs. You don't have to meet all three. So you have to be a for-profit business. It doesn't apply to nonprofits. Yay. It has to be a commercial enterprise. You either have annual revenues over $25 million, and best thinking is that doesn't have to derive from California. That's just in general. That's the received wisdom on as sort of the consensus of development. That's actually not specific to California because you've got these other two. Even if you don't have that, if you essentially receive or transmit or process, to use the GDPR term, the personal information of 50,000 or more California residents, so we know what those are, devices, yikes, or wait for it, households. This is the thing that's freaking everybody out. So you guys know a lot about privacy, information security. Raise your hand if you've seen any other privacy-related doctrine, any regulation, is it something I don't think it's out of Graham Leach Bliley. Only time I've ever seen it, I used to represent in private practice cable companies. And so you talk about Nielsen households and things like that. But in the privacy context, household, and it's not defined in the statute. There's no definition.
that one actually will cover nonprofits?
No, nonprofits are out completely. They're out completely. You have to be a for-profit enterprise for it to apply. That's like, yeah.
Susceptible to data breaches anybody else.
Exactly.
Especially research nonprofits.
And there are actually there's some provisions in there around research and what, how there are exceptions that are built in. Some of them are clearer than others. But the definition of, so household is not defined at all. So you've got a couple that's going through a divorce, let's just say. You've got roommates. You're going to exercise your right to get data from your household? How's that going to work, right? So that's scary, and there's a lot of, there's just no clarity around that at all. Devices is defined extremely broadly, right? So it's, this, it's your refrigerator, it's your car, it's anything that can connect to the internet.
Anything which is smart and has an IP address and can talk to internet can be considered under devices.
So you couple that with a very broad definition of personal information. So it's biometric information, it's location, it's IP, it's all of that stuff, or anything that can be used with that stuff to identify an individual. We're familiar with that from GDPR. I mean, I don't think it's any broader than the GDPR definition, kind of modeled on it to some extent. So the first step is 50,000. How do we even know, and do we know that they're from California? How do we know that? They're visiting our website. We're collecting data from them. How do we know they're from California? Think about that. Okay, and then the last one, probably even more unclear, 50% or more of its annual revenue is derived from sharing the personal information of California residents. A word about, I said selling, or did I say sharing? They talk a lot about selling, and I remember when I first read this, I was like, well, that doesn't mean selling. I mean, who does that? Sell is defined as essentially any transfer for value. Any transfer for commercial value. It doesn't have to be dollars and cents. Any incentive, basically, unless you're giving someone your personal information as a true gift, like, here, please take it, Like, here's my ATM card, I don't want anything from you. Go, use it. Then it's a sale. So don't let that terminology confuse you.